flights have arrived, so we are ready for our journey in thinking about reputation building in the 21st century. I'm going to start by saying that I'm incredibly honored to be here today and to have this opportunity to share with you some ideas of what essentially has been my life's work, the focus on reputation. What makes it, let me just make sure, what makes it particularly moving to be here is that this is an incredible gathering. A gathering I will characterize as both monumental and momentous. Monumental because of the composition of everybody who is here in the room from multiple countries and multiple industries to spend 4 days together thinking on this topic. Momentous, as we already heard, because of the moment in time in which we live, where reputation is really in a new stage of addressing both corporate and societal issues. It's truism to say that we live in the age of uncertainty. The world is beset by multiple crises, new technologies, and new forms of organizing both markets and production have stretched our understanding and have left people, sorry, I'm getting there, and have left people bewildered, confused, disillusioned, and dare I say, angry. New communication technologies both bring people together and push them apart. And in this world of flux, I would argue reputation plays a particularly important role. Peter Drucker, some time ago, the founder of modern management, said that the problem with disruption is not disruption itself. I apologize. I'll get some help. All right, oops. All right, the problem with disruption is not disruption itself, but facing the new circumstances with yesterday's logic. So I would like to invite you to reflect together during this Congress on how the logic of reputation is changing. And to this end, I'm going to focus my talk today on what does it take to manage reputation strategically. Specifically, I'm going to focus on what I call the 3 strategic fundamentals of reputation building. Outside in, which is how organizations shape beliefs. Inside out, how they develop internal capabilities to create value. And altogether, the co-creating of value with stakeholders. I will also emphasize the changing patterns in the management of these fundamentals and the implications of these changes for managing reputation strategically. So, let's talk about reputation, the focus of this gathering. Who in this room thinks that you know exactly what reputation is and that you can manage it? Show of hands. Oh, I hear somewhat uncomfortable laughter because we are all professionals. And the answer to this question is not as simple as it seems. Reputation means many things and is generated by many factors. So there is a risk that actually it becomes one of these big umbrella words like leadership or excellence or even strategy that are too broad to be meaningful and for sure too broad to be useful. So what I'm going to emphasize is how to focus on some strategic fundamentals that provide practical levers for managing reputation from a strategic point of view. I have spent a lot of time thinking about this problem. I have written over 70 academic articles, 25 of which are on the topic of reputation. And my conclusion is this: a reputation is many things, but not all things. So having a clear definition about your approach to reputation is critical. Reputation is not just a valuable intangible asset, it is a strategic asset. And by that I mean that it is critical to the positioning of the organization in its environment, which, by the way, is the definition of strategy. So reputation matters in terms of how the organization is positioned relative to customers, relative to suppliers, relative to competitors, the general public, the government. So it is actually a central strategic driver of organizational strategy and performance. So for those of you who are reputation management professionals, especially coming from the communication side, my recommendation to you is this: if you would like a seat at the strategic table, might be helpful to take a strategic approach to reputation management. So my goal for today is to provide you with one such strategic perspective that will help you not only add value to your organization, but also think about how you might be able to influence the organization to reflect your vision, your value, and essentially play a full role in the strategic leadership team of the organization. So, a little journey in time. When I started thinking about the problem of reputation, which was really the early 90s, not many people are thinking about it, I found myself with a tricky problem, in which literally at the time I framed to myself thinking with this clever La Rochefoucauld statement about love. I paraphrased it at the time in the PhD program that reputation is like the belief in ghosts. Lots of people use the term, but actually very few people knew what it means and what it is. And it was a real problem because at the time, Charles Schwambrun has written only the first 3 chapters of his book. He handed them to me as freshly printed out of the printer and with a little yellow post-it and said, "Critique, but be kind." And that was the beginning of a great partnership. I was his first doctoral student to work on the topic of reputation. There were many after that. And the PhD coordinator at the time said, "Why would you want to do a dissertation on a topic that does not exist?" So that was a long time ago. Since then, there have been a tremendous amount of work in the area, both in theory and in practice, and the topic has really blossomed. So there are many, many definitions of reputation. I'm sure each of you have your own, but the one that I'm going to offer today is this: the sets of beliefs that stakeholders hold about the firm's ability to create value. And underlined in this definition are what I consider the 3 strategic fundamentals of reputation building. 3 key levers that allow you to pragmatically manage the building of reputation. I love the concept of cultivating reputation. I fully agree that the process is unpredictable and requires a lot of care and some luck and adaptability. And at the same time, I'm going to take my time today to focus specifically on how thinking about these strategic fundamentals can make this task more strategic. Inherent in this definition is also a little model. So there are 3 variables of which the shaping of beliefs is the final outcome. Beliefs reflect perceptions of value, which depends on the capabilities that firm develop. Simple enough, simple and robust, and we'll spend some time unpacking each of these factors. I would like to make sure that this doesn't give you the impression that it always works all right, and that this isn't necessarily a positive and successful process, because stakeholders may hold beliefs that the organization's capabilities are mediocre, or outdated, or even counterproductive. So there is no assertion here that this results in positive reputation, but there is a statement that thinking strategically about these levers allows you to proceed in a systematic fashion across the development of reputation. So let's unpack this model a little bit. The outside-in perspective focuses on stakeholders' perceptions, images, opinions, judgments. I'm sure you have heard all of those terms. It's a little confusing. There are some nuances around, how they form from a cognitive point of view and how they work. But I focus on beliefs because beliefs reflect what we think is true. Beliefs are justified, at least in people's minds, and people take them to reflect reality. So from that perspective, beliefs define what an organization is known for in people's minds and what it is valued for. Most importantly, for our purposes, beliefs drive action. Whether stakeholders choose to engage with the organization or not, what they're willing to pay, or how they're willing to structure their relationships very much depends on the nature of beliefs that they hold. So the strategic challenge with beliefs is to think about what your role might be in shaping them so that you use that as a strategic lever. The inside-out approach focuses on what organizations do internally in order to make those impressions and generate those beliefs. And there are many different attributes that define the internal capacities of the firm to generate positive reputation. But I'm going to focus on capabilities, because capabilities drive every outcome and impact that the firm could have intentionally on stakeholders and society. So whether firms do well or not, whether they do good or not, and many other such questions depend on the capabilities organizations choose to develop and how they use them. So we'll spend some time on capabilities as the foundation of the inside-out perspective. And the third perspective, so capabilities create stakeholder value. And the third perspective is the altogether, which is how we co-create value. And the idea here is that value generated through capabilities is actually the place where firms' aspirations to create value and stakeholder experiences of whether value is created meet. So thinking about value as the boundary and the interface with stakeholders suggests that more value can be created and therefore better reputations can be generated if these processes, stakeholder processes, are relational and collaborative. So I coined the term altogether in order to highlight that the role that stakeholders play in the perception, appreciation, but also creation of value. And this is increasingly so in this day and age, and something that is particularly important for universities. So value is an experience. Now that we have established these three fundamentals, let's take a look at the patterns of how they're changing. I made the argument that a time of disruption calls for a new logic, and here I have outlined some of the changing logics associated with each of these fundamentals. On the capability side, historically, research and practice have emphasized execution capabilities because they're the foundation of excellence, reliability, and perception of the organization being able to consistently deliver on expectations. But I'm going to argue that innovation capabilities are going to become increasingly important because of the age in which we live, and also because innovation actually can create greater changes in value, leaps in value, which, as I argued earlier, is central to perceptions of reputation. So one shift is thinking about how organizations and universities, for example, may move from flawless execution to the more risky business of innovation, where the opportunity for value creation lies. Second, whereas much of the thinking of value creation has been that kind of from an organizational point of view, we create and we deliver through our expertise, through our excellent processes, through our human capital, increasingly we see models everywhere, including in education, of greater value being generated through co-creation processes. So a shift in the creation of value is from the value created within organizational boundaries to the value created across organizational boundaries. And the third shift is that whereas in models of opinion formation, images, even branding, we historically have focused on individuals with the idea that these beliefs are in the minds of people. But increasingly, beliefs are shaped in interactive platforms, and as such, they're a group-level process, calling attention to the need to think about the interactivity in these platforms. So we're going to start with unpacking how the shaping of beliefs might have changed. And I have a little framework here that starts with signaling, then speaks to intermediation and to the social platforms. So the notion of signaling comes from economics into the reputation work. Why? Because economists kind of have always been very suspicious of communication. In fact, at times unkind. They call it cheap talk. And I know that because my dissertation had communications in the title. So I often got the question about how is this not just cheap talk? So signaling is the idea that how organizations convey information that is credible, that cannot be faked. And the way organizations do this is by creating these costly moves that are difficult for those of lower quality to have. So here comes the peacock. Economists borrow the idea of signaling from biology with the notion that the peacock tail reflects the size and the sort of beauty of it, reflects the particular peacock's advantage, reproductive advantage, and attracts females. So the notion of signaling in markets isn't exactly the same. What is it that organizations that have better quality, that is not readily observable, can do that organizations that don't have that quality cannot do? Here's some examples of peacock tails from university settings. It's the university buildings. My good friend and co-author Louis Martins, who was also at the PhD program at NYU and worked with Charles, did his dissertation on business school responses to decline in rankings. And he found that the #1 response was actually doing something about a new building. Expand it, beautify it, retrofit it, or otherwise essentially create a tangible signal that we mean business. Here is another recent one, Bocconi University. This has become such a trend that now we have rankings of business schools buildings. As soon as the competition unfolds in this dimension, rankings come in to tell us who is the most valuable actor in this space, which brings me to the second mechanism, which I called intermediation. This is the role of critics, authorities that actually communicate to stakeholders from a position of authority, right? That's the credible component, about the relative value of competitors. So media is the most prominent intermediary, and I'm sure all of you work with the media in various capacities. So how do media shape beliefs? First, they create visibility. They give visibility to both issues, what is on the social agenda, on the conversation, what defines conversation, and to specific actors, organizations, and their positions relative to these social issues. Second, they evaluate and compare. So they give to the market, to stakeholders, ready-made status orderings, which can serve as intangible assets for those organizations, but also kind of compare them in very direct ways and takes away the agency in defining their relationship with stakeholders. And finally, in some of my work, I discovered that the media doesn't just establish reputations, they also create celebrity firms. And the difference between reputation and celebrity firms is that the positive tone of media coverage about celebrity firms is not a rational evaluation of excellence, but simply a positive emotion. Very similar to what we see with the celebrity enterprise. So these intermediaries shape beliefs in all of these different ways, and beliefs matter. In a study I conducted with my co-authors, we looked at how firms that have these different intangible assets, which we call social approval assets, are evaluated by investors when they announce earning surprises. So on the left side, the plus indicates positive earning surprises, and the negative sign indicates negative earning surprises. Earning surprises is the difference between the earnings that firms report at the end of the quarter relative to the consensus estimate of financial analysts. And the reason why this is important is because no surprises is a good thing, because it ensures the predictability, the reliability, essentially, of the investing process. So both positive and negative surprises are not necessarily welcome, but obviously positive surprises are good news and negative surprises are negative news. So what we discovered, to our utter surprise, is the following. When firms announce positive surprises, celebrity firms benefit the most. They have the highest returns upon announcing positive surprises. When they announce negative surprises, high reputation firms, which we measured by their position in the Fortune Most Admired, benefit the most. And both do better than firms that actually do not have these intangible assets. So this is one of the first studies that actually showed clear differences in reputation versus other kinds of positive evaluation on substantive stock market performance of firms. The biggest surprise of the study was that high visibility firms that have only prominence but no elements of positive evaluation, whether sort of rational, right, vetted by some criteria, or just emotional, do the worst. So they're in the limelight without anything to buffer them when surprises happen. So this little matrix maybe gives us a little bit of food for thought about where we participate on the spectrum of media attention, evaluation, and celebritization. They have different consequences, and there are trade-offs between them. Finally, social platforms, they have been named the new intermediaries. And the idea is that they are competitors or substitutors, the technical term of the media. Substitutors because they do not do the same thing, but they reduce the value of the media by doing something similar and addressing similar needs. So a lot has been written on the topic. I'm simply going to highlight some of the key advantages and disadvantages of social platforms relative to the intermediation of traditional media. What they include is that essentially central to the role of social platforms is the social network effect. They work the way social networks work in real life. People share more information, they trust the information more, they are willing to transmit information, allowing organizations to achieve reach at scale at a relatively low cost, and they enable kind of a broader, they cast a broader net. They enable a broader set of issues to surface, often on a global scale. On the not so good side, instead of convergence on issues, which was one of the historical functions of the media in democratic societies, is establishing sort of the agenda for the conversation, they actually tend to generate pockets and echo chambers, so there is more fragmentation in the collective conversation. They're not bound by professional norms for obvious reasons. And the content on them tends to be more emotional and values-based. They're more moralized. So they contribute to the moralization of attitudes and to the emotionalization of conversation, which puts us back in the thinking about the difference between reputation and celebrity. So my co-authors and I wrote a paper where we actually argued that the 21st century might be defined by conversations that are more emotional and more moralized, the more kind of rational models of reputation that we have historically have adopted. I'm not going to be able to say much on this topic because it's all a new frontier, but I'm just going to highlight that we are on a path of a whole new discovery of essentially the generation of information, communication, and beliefs. We're just starting this conversation, so this is mostly here as an attention sign in case you weren't paying attention. So, summary, managing reputation outside in. The focus on stakeholder beliefs is probably the most direct path to connecting what people think to actions that they take, which is not to say that people don't have irrational beliefs or that they don't act on impulse, but systematically speaking, beliefs is the connection between cognition and action. In shaping beliefs, it is important to both recognize organizational agency and the constraints posed by different intermediaries, and I highlighted some of the differences, and to think about how you might be able to increase your influence by essentially mastering the three disciplines and working across the spectrum of intermediaries. The next topic, we will cover the lever number 2, which is the inside perspective, and how should we think about capabilities that might support the development of reputation in the 21st century. Innovation has become a major imperative for organizations, just as a function of basic digital technology disruption among many other factors. But traditional organizations struggle on their innovation journey, and I know that because I work a lot with organizations nowadays on crossing that bridge. In fact, this Accenture study finds that organizations tend to run innovation in the same way that they do their regular operations. And in doing so, they miss critical opportunities. I see some smiles. I know exactly how this goes because we have those conversations in universities all the time. So what I thought I would share with you is an example of an organization that exhibits the development of innovation capabilities independent of technological breakthroughs and demonstrates that developing innovation capabilities is a matter of a strategic mindset to a larger degree than just technological access and understanding of technologies. So my story is set in the context of the US coffee industry. I'm not sure if you will be able to fully relate to my story because Spain has never lacked good coffee, but I actually went to the US from Spain, and boy, was that hard. Because essentially this was the scene in the US coffee industry. Coffee was a commodity product that was bought in open markets at the lowest possible price. It was sold in supermarkets, and then you could buy it in Dunkin' Donuts for, I don't know, 75 cents. In fact, in the US, they have an expression, that and 50 cents will buy you a cup of coffee, meaning that whatever you said is worthless because you need to add 50 cents to get the cup of coffee. So that is the stage in which Starbucks launched a super premium product. And I did my dissertation on Starbucks because no one understood, not even Charles von Braun, no one understood what they were doing. I talked to their direct competitors, the small specialty coffee companies, and they said, they're just a marketing play. They don't know anything about coffee, and they're just, you know, they really are not part of our industry. I talked to the established players, and they said they're a niche player. They will never get any traction. And usually a small company, like small market share in a stagnant or declining market is sort of, you know, get out of that business type of strategic situation. I talked to the investment bank that took them public, and they had to overcome a great deal of skepticism about the idea that they should take public a company that was competing in a declining industries with no barriers to entry and established players. So that made it that much more motivating for me to figure out what were they doing and how were they able to charge super premium prices in an industry with a commodity product that has existed for thousands of years with no technological innovation. That was my puzzle. So what did I discover? They started by essentially innovating the commodity. Their terminology for that was romancing the bean. That was the language that they used. And romancing the bean meant that they were not going to buy it in the open markets through brokers, like even their specialty competitors did that, because obviously it's a lot more efficient. They will do direct sourcing from growers, and that may look like a more expensive strategy, but they certainly had some bargaining power there and a lot more control over the quality. So not only they did that, right, they kind of went and did this, but they actually created these little cute labels with the destination coffee. And I talked to one of their competitors who said, you know, we have one product, coffee. It's in these like brown paper bags. And they have 20, 30 different products and a lot of excitement around, you know, kind of elevating the notion of coffee, which was the romancing the bean part. They also romanced the drink. They created a whole culture around the barista, put them on stage, and essentially involved communication, theatrics around handmade beverage, which also had, like, you know, that special Starbucks language that you had to sort of order in fake Italian. So to do that, they also had to change their relationship with with the employees, the baristas. So I want to highlight this because we talked about signaling, right? So here is an example of a company involved in signaling. When Howard Schultz came back later on, decades after I finished my dissertation, due to performance declines, what he did is he closed all of the company stores from 5:30 to 9 p.m. to retrain all of the baristas in the art of espresso making. They lost 6 million that day. And that is an example of costly signal that said loud and clear, we are about quality, despite what you are actually experiencing in this moment in our stores. So, but before that, they actually really emphasized the role of human capital to be able to create this romancing the drink, and they called it a culture that pampers. And their theory was that if they pamper their employees, that will translate in the relationship with customers. So in the US, Starbucks to this day spends more on employee benefits than actually on coffee. And in another costly signal, they were the first company to give stock options to everyone, for which they actually had to get a special exemption from the Security Exchange Commission. So they have been pretty consistent in making these distinctive investments, which essentially paid off. So how do you get that super premium product in a declining market with a large number of established competitors? By essentially reimagining the coffee experience from the source along the entire value chain to the actual point of experience. And that's consistent with the notion of value is an experience, and opportunities to reimagine value chains exist everywhere. And they also did a great job of communicating about that. Then when technology came around, they actually were pioneered some of these modes of remote ordering, which is to say that they have not avoided technology, quite the opposite, they have taken advantage, but they did not depend on technology to develop innovative capabilities. And today, Starbucks is a $108 billion business. I did not invest when I wrote my dissertation. Small personal tragedy. At the time, the entire specialty coffee niche was 11 billion, and the entire coffee industry was 30 billion. So it's an example which now might look trivial. We're so accustomed to seeing them everywhere, of a essentially transformation approach to a core business that was firmly rooted in stakeholder relational model. So what are some of the takeaways around managing reputation inside out? I think it's important to recognize the shift from generic value chains designed to deliver efficiency to differentiated value chains designed to deliver on multiple dimensions of value. And when I say value chains, I mean the system of activities through which an organization converts inputs into outputs. They don't have to be chains, right? In universities, we don't necessarily have value chains, but I think there is a shift toward greater differentiation. And I remember my surprise the first time I heard the term supply chain innovation. That was such a radical new way of thinking about supply chains, but it was the precursor of this notion that we need to innovate the way we organize the processes of converting inputs into outputs. Two, consumers want products that are convenient and affordable, but also local, environmentally sustainable, authentic, which speak to issues of quality and social sustainability or kind of social justice in the US. So these kind of combinations are not easy to do, right? They seem to point to dilemmas that in the past we have had to choose one or the other. But I would argue that firms need to rethink the capabilities and the resources that they seek in order to be able to generate some of these outcomes. Value chains and business models are integral to the beliefs of stakeholders that they hold about the firm. That was one of the findings from my dissertation, that Starbucks essentially romanced the value chain. They built their communications around their operational activities, which at the time people didn't really think about sort of people really caring about the processes themselves as opposed to the final products. Now that has become the norm, right? There are issues around transparency and monitoring value chains and being a lot more open about all aspects of operations. It's the same idea and requires some thoughtful attention to essentially what are the stories, the artifacts, and the experience scripts that are embedded in these value chains that are can provide a better recognition of the value, of how value is created. Which brings me to the third fundamental, which is how value creation is changing. And I already noted that we are kind of moving from producing and delivering to co-creating in a more interactive fashion. So when we talk about value creation, well, this refers to the economic and societal benefits generated relative to cost. So when we think about organizations and how they create value, we often think about the difference between the costs and price. But that's actually just the value they capture. The full scope of the value they create involves also the positive benefits for their entire stakeholder ecosystem and society as a whole, right? The organization may capture only a portion of that, but create it for its collaborators, and that is a strategic choice as well, right? How you create this value, with whom, and how much you capture. Value co-creation happens when this value is created in a collaborative fashion through the development of new concepts, solutions, products, and services. I think this is a particularly important issue for universities, but not only universities, to consider, because new generations, the people that are in our classrooms today, and a lot of the customers we serve, actually have expectations to be in charge of their experience, which means they want to contribute, often for free. So thinking about how it's again a rethinking and a reimagining process of how to leverage this shift. One place I would point to is that historically we have thought about markets as arm's length relationships, right? That's part of the definition, and the logic for that was that markets allow for the most fluid, right, dynamic allocation of resources. So because of that, arm's length transaction needs can be met in the most dynamic way. That's, again, economic theory. In reality, there is clear evidence that stakeholders look for more relational approaches. So transactional firms tend to connect when they want something from their stakeholders, right? It's the same thing. I produce, I deliver. When I want something, I reach to stakeholders. They're very concerned whether their customers are loyal to them, but do they feel that they need to be loyal back to customers? How many of you have been confronted with special promotion for new customers only? Right, so that's a particularly egregious place of that asymmetry in loyalty expectations. And they pretty much say, without saying it explicitly, that they value their customers mostly for their wallets. And there is a long history in strategy in thinking about who are your most profitable customers, right? That's kind of a sound strategic logic, until it's not. So in a world when we think about value co-creation, the sort of different approaches are needed. One is value co-creator firms build genuine and mutual relationships with each stakeholder group, with their stakeholders. They create wins-wins, not zero-sum value capture games, and they're deliberate about enabling their partners to capture some of the value. Right? They're not looking to maximize the value they capture. It's a bit of a counterintuitive logic, especially kind of from an investor point of view, but we see a lot more models when the sustainability of an ecosystem really rests on this win-win reasoning. They move their customers from transactors to supporters to promoters and to co-creators. Transactors are kind of the default that we talked about. They buy a product and they move on. Supporters have regular interactions with the firm. They are regular customers or in other ways are willing to contribute to the business. Promoters, I think we all target the promoters. They're perfectly happy to tell everyone about us. They share their excitement, they share their experience. They are an extension of our communication efforts, and as such, already a value co-creator. And then the sort of strict definition of value co-creator is that you're engaged in partner kind of relationship where what you create together could not have been created without the participation of that actor. So in a nutshell, the summary of managing reputation altogether is to think about value as an experience. Active participation increases the experience of value. So even if you're not reimagining the whole business model, or thinking about where active participation may occur, increases the experience of value. Value co-creation requires different attitudes, processes, and relationships at the organizational interfaces with stakeholders, which often means that maybe you need to think about hiring different people. I was recently read an article about sort of the future of the university, where the author was making an argument that we have moved from the ivory tower to the Twitter sphere, and that universities need to think about hiring faculty and accepting students who have the personalities to engage in communications. In other words, if you think about universities, how we have emphasized, sort of standard scores, right? Essentially measures of scholastic ability, or even though some of those are questionable, but at least we have kind of, that has been the focus. This article was saying, no, you just need to hire more gregarious faculty and students because you live in a new world, right? That's a radical proposal. I'm in no way advocating for it, but I'm just highlighting how different the model of value co-creation may be relative to where we are today. And as such, organizations may need to pursue different kinds of resources and capabilities that create effective collaborative relationships. I think at some intuitive level, we all understand the importance of collaboration, but it's one of those, the devil is in the details, and sort of from a governance and leadership perspective, there is a lot of work to be done in terms of what it means to actually open our organizational boundary. It can be the topic of a separate lecture. But I'm going to move toward the recap. So what we discussed today is one definition of reputation as the sets of beliefs that stakeholders hold about the firm's ability to create value. And I chose this because it focuses on strategic fundamentals, things that tie reputation management directly to the firm's strategy. And in some ways, you may ask, are we really that close? Like, is the communication function, is the reputation management function that close to the organization's strategic leadership team? And my answer will be, if you're not, get closer, right? Because that is actually an essential relationship in this day and age. We talked about how these strategic fundamentals give a little robust framework to think about how our reputation management efforts are oriented, what do they actually target, and how do they connect the components of ability, which to deliver value, to shaping beliefs. And I would say that one of the things that maybe distinguishes reputation management from brand management is this close link to the core of what an organization does and the capability that create value, then that can be communicated, right, with branding and other means. We also highlighted the changing patterns associated with these three levers, kind of from moving from execution to greater emphasis on innovation, from producing and delivering to co-creating, and from individual observers to interactive platforms. So in a nutshell, in a hyper-connected, radically contingent mundo cambiante, right? That was the expression. Reputation must be strategic. Just because otherwise there's too much noise to overcome, right? That's kind of the simple statement around it. Building reputation strategically, a helpful way to think about is kind of how we are connected to the three fundamentals: capabilities, value, and beliefs. And what does it mean to actually have a strategic relationship to these fundamentals? Do you have processes that you are directed towards shaping those beliefs in a systematic way? How do you choose and develop internal capabilities, including the culture that supports them? How do you create more value through better relationships at the interface where the organization and its stakeholders meet to do great things together? And I personally like to think about building stakeholder relationships from that point of view, doing great things together. So thank you for this opportunity to share some of my what I have learned on the topic. We have about 10 minutes for questions. Thank you. Thank you. Everything was so clear. Great. Yes, please. Do you need a mic?
Thank you so much for your exposition. I have one question related to the house that you mentioned at the end. I know that corporate social responsibility must be one of the how we can create value or co-create value with the stakeholders. But do you know more about how this is linked with the reputation? Mm-hmm. Because nowadays it's a must in companies. And I know that it's quite related, but I don't know, in your experience, how do you see that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the challenge here, so corporate social responsibility in some ways has become a functional area, like a specialized area that does its thing as opposed to a component of the strategic conversation. I have also observed in my work with companies that often the corporate social responsibility is connected to the community relationship unit, at least in the US, and they actually are a different culture in comparison with the marketing group. So even the sort of as communication functions, they are often not connected, let alone going beyond that and connecting to other functions. So my response will be that to seek strategic relationship and strategic impact, it is important to take a proactive role in relating to all of the rest of the functions that touch different capabilities, that measure value, right, that define. So engaging in a conversation across functions with the understanding of what they're solving for and how you might together revisit some aspects of the interface between the functions can be a step in the direction of becoming more strategic. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Sure. Yes, 5 minutes. One more question then.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you very much for your presentation. It was brilliant. And I found it especially interesting that the concept of celebrity as opposed to reputation and the differences of the impact and the reactions to the same events or the same situations. So would you say that celebrity is more related to individuals, maybe leaders, or maybe some particular people inside the top levels of organizations, as opposed to the overall reputation of the firm? And how could you be managed these kind of differences in terms especially of corporate communication? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question, and maybe I'll share a little bit how I discovered the concept. So it was the year was 1999, and this was the internet bubble, if you remember. So I was coding data on the most visible firms in that space, and the reason why I started coding the data is because I thought, from everything that we know about reputation, this shouldn't be happening. Just like I earlier said, from everything we know about strategy, Starbucks shouldn't be happening. How is it possible that these companies are raising to prominence and to this level of performance without actually track record of performance, which is a requisite for reputation? And so what I discovered in coding the media data on that is I took as a comparison Yahoo. Remember Yahoo? Once they were a great firm. And Lycos, they were in the top most visible firms during the bubble. And what I discovered is when the media talked about Lycos, they talked about essentially the equivalent of the contents of a strategy textbook. They talked about their competitors, their management team, their resources, like what you would normally do. When they talked about Yahoo, they talked about naming their servers after their favorite sumo wrestlers. They talked about employees, that an employee tattooed the Yahoo logo on his head, and a whole bunch of other stuff like that that didn't really fit. So that was the beginning of my intuition and my thinking about celebrity firms as opposed to just celebrity CEOs. And since then, we have essentially observed that the media emotionalizes firms to various degrees. Some they cover in a more kind of objective way, and for others they tell these colorful stories. What we found in that study is, and so our argument is that firms get in that celebrity position when they have a strategy that is more deviant, more different from the rest of the industry in a way that maybe there is some controversy around that. So the media work to magnify that and make it more interesting. And in this paper, we actually found that celebrity firms are more likely to surprise. They're the most, of all the categories, they're most likely to post earnings surprises, both positive and negative, which goes with this notion that they may be more innovative or more deviant, of which we have plenty examples in both directions, right? Whereas the high reputation firms are the least likely to surprise the market, which speaks to what we have been saying, that reputation is built on strong capabilities for consistent performance. So that's kind of where it's at the firm level, as opposed to just the individual level, is that the larger system of activities, the strategy is different. Does that help?
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. I think we are out of time, but I'll be around in the break, so thank you so much. Look forward to it. Thank you.